everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Push Start to Listen, where we take a look back at the week in video game news. And obviously, this week was dominated by E3. We have our full E3 2021 recap already up on the channel, so if you want to hear about all the new games that were announced, you can go check that out. But I was able to dig around this week and find a few things that weren't part of E3 that we'll touch upon tonight. Why don't we get right into it? First up this week is kind of the inevitable. Rockstar has announced that on December 16th of this year, they will be shutting down the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 versions of Grand Theft Auto Online. They're also shutting down the online components for LA Noire and Max Payne 3 as well. I mean, this isn't a surprise. It was going to happen eventually. I'm sure there is still a somewhat, probably sizable, more than you would think, player base on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, but at this point, hey, you gotta kind of move on, and I'm sure that most people that are playing these days are on Xbox One, PlayStation 4, and PC, not to mention that the Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5 versions are coming out in the near future, so yeah, it makes sense. It's always a shame when a highly played title loses its servers and, you know, you kind of see it sunsetted into the night, you know, once and for all, but these things happen. This game is such a huge moneymaker for Rockstar. I am sure it is a large part of the reason why we have not seen Grand Theft Auto 6. I also think that unrelated to the online portion, you know, there's been some serious turnover at Rockstar with some very key founding members having left. I'm sure they're trying to kind of pick up the pieces and see what they want to do for the next Grand Theft Auto game. You know, they did such an amazing job with 5, and then they rolled that success right into an amazing online portion that is making them more money than they ever imagined, I'm sure. They followed it up with Red Dead Redemption 2, which was an incredible single-player experience. The online portion of that game is popular, though nowhere near the level of the Grand Theft Auto online component. But, you know, Red Dead 2 was certainly a highly regarded game. I'm sure that they feel like they have a lot to live up for whatever Grand Theft Auto 6 ends up being. Of course, me being me, I play those games for the single player portion, so I'm hoping that they do an equally, you know, in-depth job on the single player for GTA 6 whenever it comes out, just like they did on GTA 5 and Red Dead 2. So yeah, it's a shame whenever stuff like this happens, but, you know, it's kind of the way things go when you're playing an online game. Microsoft is continuing its push to really change the future of Xbox by further investing into XCloud, and there was an article that came out this week by Nathan Grayson from Kotaku on Wednesday talking about how the doors are opening for Xbox One systems, the X, not the Series X, to be able to stream Series X games. I'm going to paraphrase a little bit here, but it says, previously Microsoft had focused on XCloud's ability to bring beefier games to less sophisticated systems like phones and tablets. It says, however, the company recently announced that XCloud will soon be switching over to the Xbox Series X hardware on the server side of things. It opens up opportunities to let Xbox One owners play games that would otherwise set their aging boxes aflame, as he wrote. This is absolutely awesome if it ends up working and ends up happening, because as you all know, there is a supply shortage and it's very difficult to get an Xbox Series X. It seems like it is getting a little bit easier to get an Xbox, certainly much more easier than getting a PlayStation 5. Just this past week, GameStop announced ahead of time that, hey, you come back tomorrow and in store, we will have X number of Xbox One Series or Xbox Series X's and Series S's for sales. And it looks like they were actually pretty upfront and transparent with how many they actually had. I saw people posting screenshots of photos of the signs at the store that said, hey, we only have 20. So it's nice to know that, like, hey, if you showed up the next morning and you were 21st in line, you know that you can just kind of pack it up and head back on with your day. Xbox and Microsoft as a whole, they are really shifting and evolving their focus, and they're really shifting and evolving their focus away from the traditional console. They've reiterated and they doubled down this week during part of E3, saying that, like, no, we are still very focused on the console experience, but anybody can see at the business moves that they're making that they are obviously very invested in getting xCloud off and running, especially since Stadia has essentially fallen apart at this point. It seems like they're making the right moves. You know, they want to get Game Pass in the hands of people that don't have an Xbox, and they're kind of targeting two different people. They're getting it in the hands of people that don't have an Xbox, but maybe would potentially buy one. But they're also trying to get it into the hands of people that don't have an Xbox and don't plan on buying one. Maybe mobile is their preferred way to game. It's very popular, and mobile kind of comes first in a lot of Asia countries. China's mobile is huge. Japan mobile is huge, and Xbox has always really struggled in Japan. So if they can take that traditional Japanese player that's not going to buy an Xbox, but sell them Game Pass, hey, that's money in their pocket that they didn't have before. So it's really cool to see that they are really just trying to kick the door down to like each and every possibility, because it seems like their singular mission from a forward-facing perspective is to be able to get as many people playing their games as possible. Obviously, it's to try and get as much money out of everybody as they can, because they certainly realize that not everybody is going to buy a console, but they may pay, $10 a month or whatever it ends up being to get Game Pass. So smart move on them, and it definitely makes sense for people that can't go out and find an Xbox Series X. Since this week there wasn't a lot going on unrelated to E3, and I already went through all the E3 stuff, I figured I'd try and find a story that appeals mostly kind of towards me, and that's All Elite Wrestling has finally shown some footage of their upcoming console wrestling game. All Elite Wrestling announced that they were going to be making 3 games, the first of which was going to be a casino-themed gambling game on mobile. It's actually just a reskin of another gambling game already out on mobile, just with the AEW theme. They're also currently beta testing a general manager game, which actually it turns out is not sort of a general manager game in terms of what people think one is from having played them before in the past. WWE games used to have a GM mode in their games in previous years, and there's of course a lot of text-based wrestling general manager games on the PC. But the console game is the one that everybody's thinking about. They seem to have a real, I guess just come on, say it, they have a real hard-on for the N64 wrestling games. To me, those games were great at the time. They rank among some of the best wrestling games of all time. You're never going to convince me that Virtual Pro Wrestling 2, which in America was WWF No Mercy, is a top 5 wrestling game of all time. It absolutely is. But those games are dated. And they went out and they got the guy that made those games, and he's working with Ukes to make this game. They put out a cinematic trailer, and you saw the art style they were going for, and it was certainly not a realistic art style. It's got a little bit of a cartoonish look to it. And it was just kind of like, okay, I guess we just play the waiting game and see when it comes out. It makes sense with E3 going on this week that they give an update on the game. I don't think that game is coming out anytime soon. I would say even holiday next year is wishful thinking. It seems to be a very slow process for them. And you know what? If it takes them a while to make this game, that's fine. But this week we got a little bit of some, I don't even know what you would call it. I mean, it's definitely pre-alpha gameplay. It didn't say, it just said in the footage that it's, this game is a work in progress. But we got to see what a character model looks like in the game, how detailed it is. Even though it does have that cartoonish look, it is a very detailed model. And then we got to see a little bit of gameplay. We saw a couple of moves and some inside the ring stuff, outside the ring some stuff, some high flying action. And I will say it was surprising to me. It actually looks pretty good. A big issue in sports games in general, and especially wrestling games, is that characters tend to clip through each other. It happens a lot. In wrestling games, sometimes it breaks the illusion of what you're doing, because you go to punch somebody, you go to kick somebody, whatever it may be, and you're just clipping through the model, and there's a disconnect in the brain from, like the sound effect and the button input, the physical motion, and it all just kind of gets lost in translation. But with this game, it looked like the moves were actually hitting. And I don't know if this is going to be a design choice or if it's just the way the game is working right now, whatever raw state it's in. There actually seemed to be a little bit of delay, like a frame drop when the impact hit, and the more I watched it, the more it almost seems like if this isn't a design choice, maybe it should be, because in a weird way, it actually made the impact feel greater than it would have been if that animation was fluid all the way out. So I'm really curious to see what they do with this. I think a lot of people are begging for an amazing wrestling game. The WWE 2K series have been garbage for a really long time, to the point where they didn't even release one last year, and that was like pre-COVID. They decided they were not going to release it before all of that, because 2K21 was just such a disaster. We are getting a new one this year. They've had more time to make this one than they have any other one in the past, so we'll see what happens with that. But I'm hopeful for AEW. I just worry that they're chasing a dream of a game from 20-something years ago, and I don't know if they're really going to be able to kind of capture that magic all over again. but who knows. And that's gonna wrap things up for this week. A light week, but we were able to still find a few things to talk about. Let's move on to some channel housekeeping, as we always do. Lots of stuff came up on the channel this week, both video game related and non-video game related. I had a toy haul video come up the other day that in a weird way was video game related, because some of the best stuff I picked up over the past couple of months were video game toys. So check that out if you're interested. Coming up this Monday is another episode of Push Start Quick Hits. And then after that, aside from the weekly videos, it's going to slow back down a little bit. I have been pushing out a lot of stuff and need to kind of slow down a little bit. I'm in the process of writing a script for 2 different videos, so I'm just going to take my time to make them. So for the next couple of weeks after Monday's video, it's going to go back down to the 1 video a week schedule, but it'll start picking back up as I get more stuff getting, closer to being finished. Everything needed to take a pause for E3. I wasn't going to do all the E3 stuff and then also, continue working on other things that I knew weren't going to come out for a little while, so giving myself a little bit of a break. But I want to thank everybody for checking out the E3 footage. I want to thank everybody for checking out the toy haul video and just checking out the channel in general. And we'll be right back here next Saturday morning to talk about more video game news.